guys, welcome all for the webinar series in the August month. We will be talking about gearing startups for success through product engineering. So from our side, we will be sharing some insights on startup and what practices can make things effective. Before going to the series, I will be introducing myself. I am Sajidharan Sinadurai, working as a senior tech lead at 99X Technology, and I am also a Microsoft MVP on Visual Studio and related technologies. I have been working on a couple of startup projects, and we have Suren Rodrigo on the other side.
Hi, hello everyone. So my name is Suren, and I have been working for 99X Technology for the past 8 years, and I have more than 10 years of experience in the software industry. I'm handling several startup projects at the moment, and I'll be sharing my experience with you on how to use software product engineering for successful startups. And I'm also working as a product engineering consultant at the moment. Yeah, Sajid?
Yeah, before going to the real story, we will be talking about relating some of the story. Like, assume you are working as a babysitter, and you will be asked to take care of a baby for 3 hours. You will be paid $15 per hour. You will be getting $45 at the end. But in case of a real startup, when we relate to that, you will be taking care of your own baby. Like, you have to work for 24 hours. You have to go through little pain, sometimes a lot of pain, but at the end, you will get infinite love. That's the nature of a startup. Let's talk about the characteristics of a successful startup. When you talk about a startup, everything comes from the idea. The idea should be disruptive. It should redefine the market and deliver values in new ways. Everyone remembers like Apple, but everyone forget the fact that it arises from the music iPods. So the second thing is it should solve a common problem that people have. Take example of Uber. It solved the problem where taxi driver can take a drive 6 to 12 per day, and it should have a solid foundation, such as it should have limited resources and it should have a perfect team to work on. And the fourth one is the roadmap. A perfect startup should have a roadmap which should define the KPIs and what are the problems that you are going through, and it should have a goal. And everybody should have answer for what they are trying to do and why they are trying to do. And finally, if all of them must succeed, you should have a bit of luck to get succeed. And if we go to the nature of a startup project, there are basically three things that affect the level of ambiguity. Like, when you're working in a startup that is dealing with a lot of different things at the same time, it is really easy to lose some things which are very important. And the second thing is the validating idea and pivoting the feedback and adopting the changes rapidly. Everything in a startup, as I explained earlier, which starts with the idea. It's the execution that matters. Like, everybody has idea but they fail to execute. When you validate an idea, first you talk to the family and professors or friends and whom you trust about the idea. And if they give a positive feedback, then you work on the MVP that would get succeeded. And you be deeper level and create a detailed plan on whatever the features that you are going to implement. And the final thing is you have to work on the limited resources initially, but once you get on touch with it, you're expecting a lot in the future on the startup.
Yeah, and Sajid, just to add to what you said, I think we need to emphasize on the importance of the first point you have in the slide here, the level of ambiguity in a startup. So the nature of the main thing we have to understand here is that the product owner also doesn't know how the product will end up. So product owner also doesn't have all the answers. So this is a unique situation in a startup project where nobody has all the answers. So because of that, it's very important that from a product engineering perspective that we take this into account and that we plan for this. So if you don't do this, if you expect to find all the answers at the beginning, then you are about to fail. Level of ambiguity in a startup project is very high, and that's why it's really important to plan out things. I think we'll discuss more in the later slides how we are going to do this exactly. Yes. Let's continue.
Let's see what are the steps that you need to follow before starting a project.
Yeah. Yeah. So before we start a startup project, I think it's important to see what are the preparations that we need to do even before we write a single line of code. So some of these practices that I'm going to mention, you might be familiar with, but what we need to do here is to understand that because of the level of ambiguity that is in startup, if we don't do some of these practices, we are going to fail for sure. The rate of failure is very high if we do not adhere to these practices. So in order to prepare for a successful startup, the number one thing that we need to have is to define the scope of the minimal viable product that we are going to develop. And when I say we define it, we have to actually know exactly what are the features that we are going to put into our MVP. And we should, the best way is to have a reason also mentioned along with the feature, because then we know why that feature we have included inside the MVP. Because in MVP we have a very limited scope, we have a very limited set of features which we can include inside the MVP. Because of that reason, we need to make sure that we get the right set of features inside. So it's important to define the scope and adhere to a proper scope. And then the second point is actually you need to agree on a technology stack. Now, when we look at a technology stack, the main important thing is that you can't decide on a technology stack just looking at the MVP. So in a normal startup, the initial development is done on a minimal viable product. But you can't decide on a technology stack by just looking at the MVP. You need to look at the whole idea, what is the full vision of the startup. So in order to do that, you need to have in-depth discussion with the product owners and other stakeholders and get a full understanding of what is our end goal here, what do we want to produce at the end of the day. And based on that only, we need to decide on the technology. Another important aspect is the cost aspect. So startup is always running on limited resources. So we need to consider this fact and always make our technical decisions based on keeping the cost as a consideration, both at the infrastructure level and also at the resource level. For instance, if we select a technology where we don't have many people who knows that technology, and if the resources are not available in an abundance, then we will have to spend more money to get these resources in and work with. So because of that, when we decide on a technology stack, we need to think about the cost factor as well. And the third point is assembling the right team. Now, this is a very, very important thing, especially in a startup. This is a unique case for a startup because if we don't have the right team in place, again, there's a high rate of failure. Now, the number one thing that you need to look when you're assembling the right team is that team should be a cross-functional team. That means that team should have members who can actually wear different hats and work in different areas. So who's good at coding plus who understand what QA is, who understand what design is. So all these features has to be there. So the team members has to be cross-functional. And there are several characteristics that you need to look for in a startup team member. One thing is good technical skills. So when you select the technology stack in the previous step, you need to make sure these people you select to that team is skilled and can work in that selected technology. The reason for that is you have very limited time to learn it and do. So because you are working towards a deadline in MVP, there's always a deadline. So you need to just get cracking from day one. And then the team members should have good quick learning abilities. This is very important for them to understand the domain and then add value to the product by understanding the domain and maybe suggesting features and having a discussion with the product owner on what type of the scope of the MVP as well. So they need to quickly learn the domain. And the other important aspect is having good communication and negotiation skills. Also with good leadership skills. So these are very important in a startup because, as I mentioned, nobody has all the answers. So some of these answers needs to be taken in by discussing with people, but negotiating with stakeholders, and then coming into a decision. So it's always a negotiation. It's not a single person telling you what to do. In a startup environment, development environment, it's always negotiating with people, agreeing and disagreeing, and then coming into a agreement. So in order to do that, you should have good communication skills, negotiation skills, and leadership skills. And you should always have a good technical discipline, right? If you are a startup team member, if you agree to do certain things in a certain way, especially if you agree to adhere to certain engineering practices, you should always have the discipline to make sure that you do that, and that has to come naturally. That cannot be sort of the artificial thing. So the only way that you can do it is by taking people who have this discipline within them. And the other aspect that you need to do when preparing for the before you start developing a startup project is to make sure that the team members perfectly understand the scope of the MVP and the scope of the project. So they need to be educated in that and make sure that they understand it. And one of the other key features that I need to mention is that if possible, have full-time members in your team. Don't try to utilize shared team members or part-time team members, because in a startup, especially at the MVP stage, it's really important to have a high focus on the product, and the whole team has to work as a unit to achieve it. So if you have shared team members, or if you have part-time team members, the full commitment might not be there. And we will talk about this a little bit later as well, but the last point is also very important, that is adhering to a development process from day one. Again, this is extremely important in a startup environment, because if you don't do this, the communication, everything that the team do has to be sort of done in a way that it's managed by a process. Otherwise, in a startup, you really have very little wiggle time. So you don't have time to see what has been done, whether it's done properly. It has to be automated, things have to move forward, and best way is to adhere to a proper management structure. And okay, so as the next one, maybe we can look at the architecture and technology selection. So basically, I need to talk about a little bit about the architecture. So the architecture that you select in a startup project is very important, because it should be a very flexible. It should be a very flexible architecture, because it needs to change. So one thing that's for sure is that because of the level of ambiguity that is there, the requirements might change down the line, the infrastructure might change down the line, there can be drastic pivoting that can happen down the line. So the architecture should be flexible to handle those. And the technology selection should also be done in a way that it should be a proven technology, where we have the know-how of how to handle that, and the cost factor has to be taken into account as well. The next thing I want to focus is about the engineering practices. Now, in a startup project, again, this is very important, more than in a normal project, because if we don't follow certain engineering practices, again, the failure rate of the startup project will be very high. So that's why the slide says essential engineering practices, because these engineering practices, in our experience, we know that these are essential for a startup to operate. Number one thing is that you should have a very good continuous integration environment, and this continuous integration environment should be capable of integrating code from all the people from different source repositories, and it should also be coupled with good code quality analysis, regression testing, and vulnerability testing. And again, we should have a good continuous deployment environment set up as well, where once we ensure the code is passed from the quality and regression testing and vulnerability testing, then we need to deploy the code directly into the staging environment and to other environments, maybe the UAT environment, and maybe even to the production environment. So in a startup project, it's really important to build this pipeline properly and have it in place from day one, because then you are ensured that you have the necessary environment ready to work fast. So that is the key factor here. And the other thing is to follow test first development. Now this is very, very important. So the best thing is to follow test driven development, because we need to ensure that the code that we write is the code that is needed for the feature. Like the minimal amount of code needs to be written to complete a feature. So test driven development helps us to figure it out. And also the other important thing is when we will need to do rapid refactoring. So every time we change the requirement, every time we change, we pivot, we might need to do some refactoring in the code. And having a good set of unit tests will support us to do that. And that's the only way that we can do refactoring in a confidence way. So that's why it's important to do test first development. And also making these tests run automatically is also important, because without having automated test suite, we can't sort of manually do these things and waste time here. And the regression test suite should also be part of the automated testing, because regression test suite will ensure that the past features will not break because of our new code that we commit, and that is an important thing that we need to ensure every time that we do a commit. Peer reviewing is also very important, because without peer reviewing, we can't. With peer reviewing, what we can do is to build the team confidence. We can build the trust between team members. It's a way of engaging with team members and to make sure that the code is written properly as well. And it's a great way to learn other aspects of the code as well. So if I'm coding one part of the application, by peer reviewing someone else's code, I can learn about what he's doing as well. So that's a way of actually making sure that the domain knowledge is also passed through the team members, especially in a large team environment. And we should always have bug tracking and root cause analysis tool implemented as well. So if we find a bug, we should actually see what is the root cause of this bug, and then address the root cause by not only fix the bug but also address the root cause as well. So with that, I think we covered the basics of engineering practices and some of the main areas that needs to be in place even before the coding begins. So Saji, you can continue with the development process.
Let's continue the development process in case of a startup projects. Like if you assume if you are doing a startup project, one of the best methodology that you can follow is the agile method. It suits best for the startup projects. Usually what we do is we follow a 2-week sprint where we have retrospective and feature demo on the last day of the sprint. It involves mainly backlog grooming and sprint planning and the daily stand-up. So if you take backlog grooming, we continuously update and reprioritize the task so it's up to date. And when you come to sprint planning, we plan it for 2 weeks and prioritize the work to be completed within 14 days. And during the daily stand-up, the best approach to get the feedback from the customer, and iteratively we improve the product as we go. Sometimes this doesn't work because we have experienced this, like when customer comes up with a new requirement, we have to adapt to the change and implement that feature. So what we can do in that case is we will follow a sprint for 5 days and then implement the feature in the coming sprint. And since we are also following the continuous integration, so getting update changes into the staging can happen on the same day. Most of them we do the release on the sprint at the end of a sprint, that is during the 14th day. So these are the development process that we follow, and let's see what are the steps involved in the process. Like if a developer is working on a feature, we create the branch from the master branch or the development branch, and we do the manual testing once the coding is completed, and we send for the PR review. Once the PR review is approved, we do the continuous integration. We make sure that the code is tested properly, and then we implement in the UAT or testing environment where the automated and regression testing is followed. So let's see how a startup project can be managed. If you take a startup project, the micromanagement process doesn't work. You always don't have to look into a developer and see what he's doing. It doesn't really work in a startup project because you actually don't have time. You should trust the professional. If you don't trust them, then you should not have hired. And if you really look at the startup management, the product owner is responsible for what the product should do and the features what we are working on. And when we talk about the small teams like startup, it is more like alpine style of climbing a mountain. We should be able to adapt to the changes quickly and whatever the conditions we are in. And each engineer might need to have more skills. You need to manage self self as well. And in a startup, as we explained earlier, no one knows answers for the question. You have to learn quickly as well. Let's see what forms a perfect startup team. If you look at the golden triangle rule, there is a hustler, hacker, and hipster. Hustler is the one who sells the product, and hacker is the one who builds the product, and hipster is the one who works on improvements on the UI aspects of it. It is always better to suggest to work with the marketing team to get the ideas to work on, and the designers to have a collaborative idea and create a better understanding to make better decisions. Like as a developers, we make thousands of tiny decisions when we are implementing a feature. So we should always communicate with the product manager and the rest of the team so that we avoid any bottlenecks that happen during the process. And then you should have a proper communication, as we explained. That one of the problem that we came across was like we were spending a lot of time in to identify issue. Finally we came to know that there hasn't been a proper communication. So these are the factors that form a perfect startup team.
Yeah, and just to add to that, especially on building trust and motivating the team, I think in a startup project this is very important more than in a regular project, because in a startup project, from the initiation to the end, the team doesn't have a lot of time to sort of bond or to work with, because everyone works according to a deadline, and the MVP has to be there because the time to market is really important. So in that environment, it's very important to create the necessary environment should be there for the team to build the trust, motivate each other, and work towards the common goal. So when you build the perfect team, it's important that the product owner of a startup project put emphasis on creating that environment where the team can actually work in a motivated way. And one of the key things is to have a very flat hierarchy without having any hierarchies. Because if you try to implement hierarchies and sort of try to manage the project that way, it's about to fail, because there is very much less trust at the beginning of the project, and we have to move fast as well. So the best way is to make collective decisions, make the team part of your product, and make sure that the team understand they are part of this new venture or this new startup, and that it is their product, and then the team will do the rest. So the most important thing is you should allow the team to challenge your decisions, and then make a decision based on all the information that you can gather as a product owner. So having this team environment properly tuned to make sure that a high productivity level is given from the team is very important. Yep, Sajid.
Yeah. As a team, to get things done and move forward, we should work as a team. That is, we call a teamwork. A well-bounded team is like necessary for a successful startup, and we should either succeed as a team or fail as a team in a startup. Let's see what are the common mistakes that make in a startup project. As all of you know, like 90% of the startup fails because it's just an idea, there is no execution. So, and the second thing is, when we try to implement too many features during a short span of time, there is a huge chance for failure. And then the third one is when you have no specific ideas in mind, like who are the customers who are going to use the product. And then the time is an important factor when you launch a startup. And then you have to allocate the work to each team members that they deliver the work properly. As we discussed earlier, we should always follow the engineering practices, and then we should follow proper management process. And as a summary, I can say your start will never be a successive one. You got to move on mistakes and learn from your current mistakes, and you have to improve on the future. Sooner or later, you will realize that you have on the current state, and where you will feel that you are successful one day.
Yes, absolutely. And I think with the amount of time that we have, I will like to summarize what we have discussed so far. So basically, the number one point here is that there is a lot of ambiguity at all levels when it's a startup project. And because of that, it's very common to change requirements, even have drastic pivots at the middle of the project or at any time of the project. So as a product engineering team, we need to understand that and we need to expect that. And that's why it's very important to have proper preparation even before a single line of coding happens. So three things I can just summarize here is that as part of preparation, we need to have a well-defined scope for the MVP. The MVP has to be well-defined, and everybody should understand what is our goal for the MVP, and you need to assemble the right team. I have given points earlier, what are the characteristics that we are looking for in the right team. So we need to find right people and assemble the right team, and then making sure the team understands the scope of the project, and that and the environment is created for them to work in a productive manner, to build their team relationships and work towards a common goal. And the other point is having the proper architecture in place. So this is very important, considering different factors, like the architecture should be very flexible so that it can adapt to different changes, requirement changes, infrastructure changes, things like that, and it should be cost effective as well. And using the right tool that allows us to do rapid application development. For example, in some of our projects, we use serverless framework, which allowed us to actually work in multiple cloud environments and manage infrastructure in a very easy manner. So in a startup project, these small time that we save using the right tool at the right time will go a long way. And the other thing is making use of proper engineering practices. Things like CI/CD, TDD, automated testing, peer reviewing, bug tracking. I know these are not new practices, right? These are things that we already know. But the uniqueness in this context is that if we don't follow these things, there's a very high rate of failure in a startup project. Because of the level of ambiguity exists, things can change quickly, and we need to be ready for that. And having a proper engineering process in place, having a set of proper engineering practices in place will help us to do that. And not only the engineering practices, the management process is also important. So having something like Agile Scrum in place will help us. We have done Agile Scrum in many of the startups that we were involved in, and it has been proven successful. The reason is that it has very simple rules and simple set of understandings for everyone to work with, and it sort of encourages teamwork, building trust, respecting everyone's opinions. So it's a perfect sort of kind of a process. And of course, you need to tune it to your condition in some cases, and then creating the right environment for the team to be effective, as Sajidharan mentioned earlier, building trust, motivating the team, respecting team's opinion, and having a flat structure where everyone's opinion is respected and taken into account, making collective decisions. All these things will go a long way in making sure a startup is successful. And finally, the common mistakes which Sajidharan just mentioned. That is basically the summary of our presentation.
Okay, guys, thanks for the time, and we will meet once again in another webinar. Thanks for listening.